Candyman. Anthony Todd's portrayal of Candyman is one of the most iconic and haunting performances in modern horror history. Standing 6'5" with a deep, resonant baritone voice, Todd was cast by director Bernard Rose without an audition. Rose was convinced he was perfect for the role and famously told Todd that this part would change his life. That prediction proved true. Together, Todd and Rose reshaped Clive Barker's original short story, The Forbidden, which was set in Liverpool, into a racially charged American Gothic tragedy. They gave Candyman a detailed origin story as Daniel Robitaille, a gifted black painter in the late 19th century who was hired to paint the portrait of a wealthy white woman. The two fell in love, and when she became pregnant, her father hired a lynch mob that sawed off Robitaille's painting hand, smeared his body with honey, and left him to be stung to death by bees. This horrific backstory reframed Candyman as a tragic, wronged spirit rather than a simple slasher villain, anchoring his menace in America's history of racial violence. Todd approached the role like a classical tragic figure. He drew inspiration from characters like the Phantom of the Opera and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, focusing on the sadness and yearning beneath the terror. Candyman's actions are not random but existential. His power depends on people believing in his legend. When graduate student Helen Lyle begins debunking his myth, she threatens his very existence. His violence is therefore a desperate act of survival. This is best captured in his chilling line.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come.
Which frames him as both victim and avenger. The production's commitment to realism heightened the film's terror. Over 200,000 live bees were used on set. Bred to be young, so their stingers were less potent. Todd negotiated a $1,000 bonus for every sting. He was stung 23 times over the course of filming. The most memorable image in the film is Candyman opening his mouth as bees pour out. Todd wore a dental dam to keep them from crawling down his throat. The crew filmed on location at Chicago's Cabrini Green housing projects, making deals with local gangs for safety and even hiring residents as extras. Candyman became an immediate classic upon release, praised for its atmosphere, Philip Glass's haunting score, and Todd's commanding, almost hypnotic presence. His portrayal redefined the black horror villain as a figure of tragic depth and cultural resonance, a ghost sustained by collective memory, haunting not just individuals but an entire society's buried sins. Prince Mamuwalde, aka Blacula. Prince Mamuwalde, played by William Marshall, represents a historic turning point in horror cinema. He was the first black vampire to headline a major motion picture and the first black horror villain portrayed with dignity and complexity. When Marshall was first approached for the role, the script was little more than a blaxploitation cash grab titled Count Brown's in Town. The character was written as a caricature, filled with stereotypes. Marshall, a classically trained Shakespearean actor known for his commanding stage presence and baritone voice, refused to accept the part unless he could reshape it into something more substantial. He worked closely with director William Crane to overhaul the script, beginning with renaming the character Mamuwalde, an African prince, rather than a generic American figure. Marshall insisted on a tragic, politically charged backstory. Mamuwalde travels to Transylvania as a diplomat seeking Count Dracula's help to suppress the transatlantic slave trade. Instead of aiding him, Dracula mocks Mamuwalde's anti-slavery mission, curses him to live as a vampire, and imprisons him in a coffin. This transformation reframed the story as an allegory for colonial oppression. Mamuwalde's villainy is not random. It is the result of a racist act of violence that condemns him to eternal suffering. Marshall approached the character as a prince cursed rather than a monster by nature. His performance emphasized Mamuwalde's humanity, sorrow, and lost nobility. One of the film's most iconic scenes features Mamuwalde encountering Tina, whom he believes to be the reincarnation of his wife Luva. His line,
"I've lived again to lose you twice,"
captures the character's eternal torment. Even when he feeds, there is no delight in the act. Marshall noted in interviews that Blacula is unique among vampires because he does not revel in drinking blood but endures it as a necessity. This choice makes him a tragic anti-hero rather than a sadistic predator. Blacula was groundbreaking not only for its character but for its production. It was the first studio-backed horror film directed by a black filmmaker, William Crane. The film became a commercial hit, topping box office charts and earning the very first Saturn Award for Best Horror Film in 1973. It launched a wave of black-centered horror films throughout the 70s and paved the way for future portrayals of black vampires, from Eddie Murphy's Maximillian to Marvel's Blade. Prince Mamuwalde remains a foundational figure, a dignified monster whose tragedy was born from the historical horrors of slavery and colonialism. Mr. Sims. Clarence Williams III's portrayal of Mr. Sims in Tales from the Hood is one of the most memorable performances in horror anthology history. Williams, best known for his groundbreaking role as Link Hayes on the Mod Squad, brought decades of stage and screen experience to the part, infusing the character with an unsettling energy that perfectly matched the film's mix of social commentary and supernatural horror. Director Rusty Kundieff designed Mr. Sims as more than just a Crypt Keeper-style narrator. He is both storyteller and judge, guiding three young drug dealers, Stack, Ball, and Bulldog, through his eerie funeral home. Throughout the film, Sims introduces four disturbing tales, each tied to a corpse in the mortuary. These stories explore themes of police brutality, domestic abuse, systemic racism, and gang violence. Williams plays Sims with a gleeful intensity. His mannerisms are deliberately erratic, swinging between quiet whispers and explosive shouts. His sweaty brow, wild hair, and fixed, unblinking stare heighten the sense of unease. In fact, the performance was so convincingly eerie that the studio reportedly asked if visual effects had been used to enhance his eyes. None were. Williams delivered the menace entirely through physicality and presence. What makes Mr. Sims unforgettable is the reveal in the film's final moments. When the drug dealers demand the drugs they came to buy, Sims leads them to three coffins that each contain their own dead bodies. As they panic, the funeral home dissolves into flames, and Sims drops his facade, revealing himself as Satan. His final line, "This ain't no funeral home. It ain't the Terror Dome neither. Welcome to hell, motherfuckers."
This ain't no funeral home. It ain't the Terror Dome neither. Welcome to hell, motherfuckers.
Remains one of the most iconic villain reveals in horror. This moment reframes everything that came before. The tales were not just scary stories, but morality plays designed to confront the young men with their sins before delivering eternal judgment. A fascinating detail about Mr. Sims' design is that his hairstyle was intentionally modeled after the abolitionist Frederick Douglass, adding a layer of historical resonance to the character. Tales from the Hood was executive produced by Spike Lee, and, while only a modest box office success upon release, has since been reevaluated as a masterpiece of socially conscious horror. Mr. Sims stands as one of the great horror hosts, both entertaining and terrifying, embodying the perfect blend of camp, morality, and cosmic justice. Maximillian. Eddie Murphy's Maximillian is a fascinating entry in the lineage of black horror villains, a Caribbean vampire who is equal parts menacing and charismatic. By the mid-1990s, Murphy was one of the biggest stars in the world, known for his groundbreaking comedy on Saturday Night Live and blockbuster hits like Beverly Hills Cop and Coming to America. His decision to take on a straight horror role was unexpected, and he co-created the story with his brother Charlie Murphy and collaborator Vernon Lynch. Their original vision was for a dark, serious vampire tale, but once Paramount Pictures and director Wes Craven became involved, a tonal battle emerged. The studio wanted a comedy. Murphy wanted a frightening, dignified villain. This push and pull shaped the final product into a strange but memorable hybrid of horror and humor. As Maximillian, Murphy embodies a classic Gothic predator. Dressed in elegant black coats and speaking in a smooth Caribbean accent, he carries himself with aristocratic poise. His mission is to find a mate and continue his bloodline, which adds a sense of urgency and tragedy to his predation. Murphy insisted that Maximillian himself remain frightening. The comedy was delivered through his other roles in the film, including the loud preacher Paulie and a grotesque Italian thug named Guido, both played by Murphy under heavy prosthetics. This allowed him to honor the tradition of black vampires like Prince Mamuwalde, while still satisfying audience expectations for his signature humor. The production itself was troubled. Reports from the set described clashing egos and scheduling issues, with Murphy occasionally delaying shoots. A tragic on-set accident further darkened the film's history. Stuntwoman Sonia Davis, Angela Bassett's double, died after a 42-foot fall went wrong, leading to a wrongful death lawsuit against Paramount, Murphy's production company, and Craven. This event left a lasting shadow over the project. Upon release, Vampire in Brooklyn was critically panned and a box office disappointment, with reviewers finding its tone uneven. However, over time, the film has gained a cult following. Fans now appreciate its gothic atmosphere, practical effects, and Murphy's committed performance as a truly intimidating vampire. A small but telling detail highlights its place in the black vampire canon.
Do that if I were you. What? You might miss the heart. You aim between the eyes, that way you get a nice, even spray.
The hell? Who the fuck are you?
Early in the film, Maximilian's decaying ghoul, Julius, complains about his master's Blacula shit, directly acknowledging William Marshall's seminal character. This self-aware nod links Maximillian to the archetype of the noble black vampire, ensuring that his place in horror history is secured as both homage and evolution. Jimmy Bones. Snoop Dogg's portrayal of Jimmy Bones marked his first major starring role in a horror film and solidified his place as one of the most unique anti-heroes in the genre. By the early 2000s, Snoop was already a global icon of West Coast hip-hop, known for his laid-back flow and charismatic dog father persona. Director Ernest Dickerson saw in Snoop the perfect vehicle for a modern, supernatural Avenger. A gangster-turned-ghost who would blend blaxploitation style with gothic horror. Jimmy Bones is introduced through flashbacks set in 1979 as a neighborhood legend. A stylish, respected numbers runner who protected his community and refused to allow crack cocaine to infiltrate his streets. His brownstone was a sanctuary, and his romance with Pearl, played by Pam Grier, symbolized the heart of the community. This idyllic world is shattered when Bones is betrayed by his right-hand man Jeremiah and a corrupt cop who murder him to open the neighborhood to drug trafficking. His body is hidden in the house's basement, and over 2 decades, the neighborhood falls into decay. A visual metaphor for the moral collapse triggered by his death. When a group of teenagers buys the abandoned house to convert it into a nightclub, they inadvertently resurrect Bones' vengeful spirit. Snoop's performance is chilling. His normally smooth demeanor becomes cold and commanding, as he dispatches his betrayers with brutal, creative methods. The film is filled with unforgettable, grotesque imagery. A demonic black dog vomiting live maggots onto a dance floor, walls embedded with writhing faces, and talking severed heads of Bones' victims. This blend of surreal horror and gangster mythology creates a character who is both terrifying and oddly sympathetic. Jimmy Bones embodies a complex duality. In life, he was a protector. In death, he becomes a force of indiscriminate vengeance, punishing not only his murderers but anyone who desecrates his memory.
Fake-ass chef, why don't you raise up off that coat? Let me have that.
Sure, here it is.
This ambiguity forces the audience to confront whether his actions are justice or damnation. The practical effects played a huge role in building this nightmare world. Snoop even allowed body molds to be made for the creation of the Necropolis Wall of Souls. According to Dickerson, Snoop was high for most of the production, but remained completely sober for the intense fire stunt sequence, which required precise timing for safety. Initially dismissed by critics and overshadowed by its post-September 11th release timing, Bones has since been embraced as a cult classic. Today, Jimmy Bones is celebrated as a rare example of a black horror villain whose story is as much about community betrayal and systemic decay as it is about supernatural revenge. Candyman. 2021. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II's portrayal of Anthony McCoy redefined Candyman for a new generation by expanding the mythology from a singular ghost story into a shared legacy of collective trauma. Abdul-Mateen's background uniquely prepared him for the role. Before becoming an actor, he earned a degree in architecture from the University of California, Berkeley, and worked as a city planner. This gave him a deep understanding of gentrification, displacement, and the reshaping of neighborhoods. Central themes in the film. Upon arriving in Chicago for production, he toured the redeveloped Cabrini Green housing projects, taking photos and notes, an exercise that mirrored Anthony's actions in the story and helped him embody the character's perspective. In the film, Anthony is a struggling artist who becomes obsessed with the Candyman legend. His curiosity leads him to discover that he was the infant rescued by Helen Lyle at the end of the original Candyman film. As he investigates further, he becomes marked by the spirit and begins a horrific transformation, physically and psychologically, into the new embodiment of Candyman. One of the film's most chilling sequences shows Anthony staring into a mirror as his reflection becomes that of Sherman Fields, one of the past victims of racial violence who also became Candyman. This effect was accomplished not with CGI, but with meticulously choreographed mirrored movement between Abdul-Mateen and actor Michael Hargrove, heightening the terror with practical realism. Director Nia DaCosta and producer Jordan Peele designed the film as a spiritual sequel, deliberately ignoring the previous 2 sequels and reconnecting directly to the 1992 original. But where Tony Todd's Candyman sought to preserve his personal legend, Abdul-Mateen's incarnation represents a larger, more political force. The film reframes Candyman as a hive mind, a composite of black men murdered by racial violence across generations. This expansion of the myth transforms him from a singular, gothic ghost into the embodiment of generational trauma and vengeance. William Burke, played by Coleman Domingo, explicitly states, "Candyman ain't a he. Candyman's the whole damn hive." There are echoes of Tony Todd's portrayal throughout the film.
Candyman ain't a he. Candyman's the whole damn hive.
Todd even appears briefly in a spectral cameo, visually passing the mantle to Anthony. Thematically, this evolution deepens Candyman's significance. He is no longer just Daniel Robitaille's ghost, but the physical manifestation of a cycle of racial injustice that refuses to die. The final act sees Anthony's brutal death at the hands of police completing his transformation, allowing him to become the newest Avenger of the Hive. His last command, "Tell everyone," is both a call for fear and a demand that the names of the victims be remembered, ensuring that the cycle of remembrance and vengeance continues. The Hitchhiker. Tom Wright's performance as the Hitchhiker in the final segment of Creepshow 2 is a masterclass in relentless terror. Wright, a prolific character actor with nearly 200 screen credits, is known for his ability to disappear into roles ranging from dramatic to comedic. But in this story, he becomes a singular force of supernatural vengeance. The segment opens with Annie Lansing, a wealthy woman rushing home from an extramarital affair, accidentally running over a black hitchhiker on a lonely main road. Rather than stopping, she flees, believing she can escape responsibility. This moment sets the tone for the entire piece, as the hitchhiker ceases to be a man and becomes an unstoppable revenant. What makes Wright's portrayal chilling is its simplicity. The hitchhiker speaks only one line throughout the entire segment. "Thanks for the ride, lady." Each time he appears, mangled worse than before, he repeats the phrase with increasing menace. Annie runs him over multiple times, shoots him, and even slams his body into a tree, but he keeps returning. His escalating decay becomes a grotesque reflection of Annie's unraveling sanity and guilt. By the final moments, he is a mutilated corpse climbing into her car, laughing and repeating the line until she finally dies from exhaustion and terror. The segment's production was written by George A. Romero and based on a Stephen King short story. King even makes a cameo as the truck driver who discovers the body early in the tale. Wright's casting has been the subject of later discussion. The story explicitly notes that the victim is black, which some critics argue highlights his otherness and makes the extreme violence against him feel racially charged. Whether intentional or not, the segment stands out in the anthology for the sheer brutality inflicted on its victim. Interestingly, Wright would later return to the archetype of the vengeful revenant in Tales from the Hood as civil rights activist Martin Morehouse, a murdered man who rises from the grave to punish the corrupt police officers who killed him. In this way, his two performances form a fascinating bridge between simple karmic revenge and the more politically charged, racially conscious horror of the 1990s. The Hitchhiker may have no explicit social message, but his presence is unforgettable, a grim embodiment of guilt that cannot be outrun, no matter how many times you try to kill it. Big Daddy. Eugene Clarke's Big Daddy is one of the most significant evolutions in zombie cinema. The first undead character to be portrayed as a revolutionary leader rather than a mindless monster. Clarke, a former Canadian Football League player turned actor, used his athletic build and commanding presence to create a physically imposing yet strangely empathetic figure. Big Daddy begins as a gas station attendant turned zombie, but unlike the others, he displays memory, problem-solving skills, and emotion. His first moments on screen show him lingering at the station pump, groaning with something that resembles sorrow as he hears the distant sound of fireworks used to distract his kind. Big Daddy becomes the first zombie to organize others into a coordinated uprising. His intelligence allows him to wield tools, discover weapons, and teach other zombies to follow suit. This culminates in a full-scale assault on Fiddler's Green, the fortified high-rise where the wealthy elite live in luxury while the masses scrape by in the slums. George A. Romero, the godfather of zombie cinema, intentionally crafted Land of the Dead as a sharp allegory for class struggle. The humans treat zombies as target practice and cruel entertainment, and Big Daddy's rebellion reframes them not as monsters but as an oppressed class fighting for survival and dignity. Clarke's performance is entirely wordless, yet remarkably expressive. He communicates grief when he discovers another zombie killed by human scavengers, cradling the corpse's head with a mournful groan. He shows rage as he learns to turn human weapons against their oppressors. Perhaps most memorably, he leads the zombies across a river, proving they are no longer limited by the simple obstacles that once kept them at bay. This scene signals the end of humanity's illusion of safety. The climax of the film sees Big Daddy personally confronting Kaufman, the ruthless leader of Fiddler's Green, as the skyscraper burns. Rather than mindlessly devouring him, Big Daddy uses gasoline and fire to destroy him, an act that feels more like deliberate justice than instinctual hunger. In the final moments, the human protagonist Riley chooses not to attack the retreating zombie horde, remarking, "They're just looking for a place to go." This moment cements Big Daddy as more than a villain. He is a liberator who has secured a future for his kind. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe. I've got a lot more content coming. Thanks for watching.